Our next keynote speaker is excellence personified. Ken Rickey founded Corporate Wings in 1981. He has grown that into Directional Aviation Capital. He has had a profound impact on our operations. He has been a leader who leads with thought and foresight. He solves problems. He sees opportunities. He's one of those people that has the ability to look around the corner. He's a pilot. In fact, he flew Governor Clinton during his first presidential campaign. He's someone who is always finding ways to see what is happening and then build upon it in ways that we couldn't even imagine. Please help me welcome Ohio native Ken Rickey.
Very kind.
Thanks so much.
Very kind of you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Ken, so great to be in your backyard, in your hometown, in your home state.
Well, it's nice to be here. This is the most fun group in aviation.
Right.
And I appreciate you interrupting your activities to listen to me.
No one we would rather hear from. So maybe if you could just quickly, this is about the beginning and the future. Maybe you could go back to that beginning, what you had in mind with Corporate Wings, some of the challenges you faced that you knew you would face, and some of those maybe wish someone had told me that.
Well, I'd like to think that it was visionary, but I was unemployed. Like your honoree today, I got laid off from, at the time, Northwest Orient Airlines. And as a pilot, I wanted to fly. And that really was how I began I really actually was doing pilot service for Corporate Wings. And at that time, like today, they had a 10% investment tax credit. And Corporate Wings would say so there was a tax reason to do this, and so Corporate Wings had these aircraft. They had King Airs and Citations, but they really didn't have the Citations. They had a fake program going on. It was actually called J&J Aviation, and for years they had an aggressive investor group that thought they were getting these tax credits. And so one day the business fell, they got caught. The auditors came in, they wanted to see the planes, their planes didn't exist. And so they had some legitimate business, and all of a sudden the J&J Aviation got caught, and then what was left was Corporate Wings, and there was a dispatcher named Rick Michaels who was kind of trying to keep everything together, and Rick called me up and he said, I got an idea for a name, I want to call it Corporate Wings. I don't want to own it. He said, you should buy it. And I said, well, how much would I pay for it? He said, well, it's $27,500. So I called my dad, and I said, Dad, I think I'm going to get into the aviation business. I'm going to buy this company. And he said, it's $27,500. He said, well, how are you going to pay for it? I said, well, they have $27,000 in the bank, so I think I can buy the company, and I can use the $27,000 to pay for it. He goes, well, what about the other $500? I said, why do you think I called you? So that was really how Corporate Wings came into existence. But I didn't do it with any great vision at the time. I did it with the idea of, consistent employment for Ken.
So walk me through a little bit. You started with Corporate Wings. Of course, you had flight operations, FlexJet. Tell us just quickly how that all came
So
together.
Corporate Wings was basically a management charter company. And then what happened is I was thinking about how to grow it. And I got concerned that, how do I make it sticky? How do I make a management business sticky? And I thought, if I owned a facility, if I had then I own the hangar. And another management company, they might undercut me on the management fee, or they might have a different program. But if I own the real estate, that would always be mine, and that would be a compelling reason for someone to have the plane with me. So in the late 80s, we started buying some facilities, Pittsburgh, Rochester, and expanded the management business that way. In the early 90s, so I've been through 4 recessions. The first one was Gulf War I. Gulf War I, our industry fell apart. The private aviation industry. I'll point out that when I started in 1981, other than having, I have a air-conditioned office now, but the other difference was that there were 2,500 corporate jets. Today there's 25,000.
Right.
So part of success was being in the right place at the right time. I grew up with an industry that grew up at the same time. So after Gulf War I is when NetJets began, because at that point in time, Hawker primarily, they had whitetails. We don't know anything about whitetails now because we have order books. Manufacturers sell aircraft years in advance. But at that time, there were whitetails. They would make the planes, and if they couldn't sell them, they didn't put an N number on them. And what Richard Santulli saw was the opportunity to get those whitetail Hawkers, these were the original Hawkers, on consignment. He said, you have them sitting out there, and that's how NetJets really gathered. Well, what that did to our industry was the most profitable routes in the charter industry, and we were based in Cleveland, so we had the large Cleveland customers, and these were all business routes, and they would go out and back, they'd go down to their plants for the day. Yeah. But then what NetJets did was they reinvented it, and they started charging one way. And all of a sudden, that looked very disruptive to me, and it looked disruptive to what it might happen with the charter business. I also recognized that that was the first time where someone came up with a real idea in aviation that absolutely costed out the asset. Because up till that time, and even today sometimes, we'll have a managed customer, and we won't sell the asset for the amount of money it takes to fully depreciate the asset, pay for the asset, refurbish the asset, do the engines. We discounted it. In some ways, it can be like the boating industry. Person has an asset, we get more utilization. And for the ability, because aircraft are so much fixed overhead, for that ability, we sell it at a discount. Because, by the way, if we don't sell it, it goes away, right? It's a disappeared, it's expendable asset very quickly. But what Santulli did, and what NetJets did, was they first came up with the idea to fully cost the asset. An owner buys the asset, they pay a monthly fee that covers the fixed overhead, and they pay an hourly fee when they use it. So I recognized that that was a different thing in aviation. And I thought, well, how do I get there? And he had new aircraft at the time, and so we started a company, Flight Options, that had used aircraft. Well, in the fractional business, you can't just buy one aircraft and sell it out to 8 people, because they recognize pretty quickly if 2 of us need the plane the same day, you have to have more than one plane. So you need a core fleet of aircraft. And so with the idea in 1996, 97, we had to go out and borrow money for the core fleet. So we had this plan, and I showed them the pre-owned aircraft. We didn't call them used, we called them pre-owned, and or previously enjoyed. And we went out to different banks, and we tried to get capital. And I think after visiting 40 banks, I think we had a sum total of $6 or $6 million. It didn't matter.
Enough.
It was not enough.
Nowhere near enough.
In June of 1998, Warren Buffett buys NetJets, and he christened the industry. And it just so happened that our deck was sitting on a lot of banks. It was sitting on their desk. And they said, we have to get in it. If Warren's in it, we got to get in it. And we went from June of 98 till we launched in November of 98, we had almost $400 million of capital that was loaned to us. Boeing gave us $50 million, Bombardier. It was amazing. These $50 million checks were coming. And that really allowed us to get the core fleet that launched the business.
Yeah, and that core fleet, you've got to get a certain number of aircraft to make it all work.
Because we're not a charter company. I can't turn down a trip.
Right.
If you're a charter company, you don't have crews, you don't have a pilot, you don't have the airplanes in maintenance. You just say, we can't do that trip. But by virtue of the bargain with fractional ownership is you call us on 4 hours notice and we fly you.
Right.
So there's an immense amount of infrastructure. And you have to have, if ultimately you want to grow the business, you have to be ahead of it. When we start a program, it's very expensive. We need 12 aircraft minimum to get an aircraft to profitability, because what's going to inevitably happen if you have two aircraft, you're going to have one owner that wants to go from Miami, one that wants to come from New York, and one that wants to come out of Hawaii. And so you have 3 trips with 2 aircraft. So you need a certain amount of core fleet to get there, and that's all expensive. And then you need the infrastructure. If 12 is your minimum, you need the infrastructure for 12, the maintenance infrastructure, the scheduling infrastructure. So every program, and think about starting with 4 or 5 programs that we did at the beginning.
Yeah.
So you needed, if you have 5 programs, you need almost 150 aircraft to get to break even on the program. And so, but it is, remember, we're a fixed overhead business, and there does come a tipping point. And when you get over the tipping point, then it's priced correctly.
Right.
It's priced profitably, yeah.
But of course, it's not just about having the assets. It's about having a culture and a team that understands what you're trying to do, how they are part of that, what they can do to grow it. So can you talk a little bit about the culture you set out for FlexJet and where it is today?
I think, if I were to talk a little bit about leadership, when I tell our teams, I say to our leaders, you can never be different as a leader than who you are as a person. The worst leaders, who they really are, doesn't align with how they manage. That's a bad recipe for leadership.
Yeah.
The best leaders align with who they are. So in other words, if you're a giver, if you're a person that, if you like to make people happy, you probably can't swear. You can't use a hard leadership style. You can't use a command.
Yeah.
You can't do the my way or the highway. That would not be natural to someone who's more of a pleaser. So I think aligning, when you talk about culture, I would tell you, first of all, in many ways, what I wanted was a business that reflected my culture. And for me, what I sought out early, and it's not so much today, but in the 80s, you were, as a pilot or as a dispatcher or someone that worked in private aviation, people thought it was a privilege. And so for that reason, they could take any advantage of you. Pilots were not paid very much. Pilots were flying for free in many cases, because you got to get stick time and you got to build your resume. And so in our industry, because it had this, it's a romantic industry, right? I always say, if you're at a cocktail party and it's you and the yarn salesman, they want to talk to you because we have great stories and we have interesting things that we do. And so we had this wonderful industry that people couldn't enjoy. So culture, I set out just to make it so that the employees, that they would fall in love, that they would enjoy the romance of aviation as much as I did. And I think that's culturally how we began. Now today, because it's a big organization, and at FlexJet, there's almost 5,000 employees, we spend a lot of time preserving the culture, because culture is hard to keep. It can get dissipated. People don't know it. The people that understood the culture, I can't even see anybody. An employee meeting in 2000, there were 10 of us who went to the bar, right? Let's have an employee meeting. Let's decide what we're gonna do with per diem. What are we gonna do with parking? But you can't do that now. So culture takes a tremendous amount of communication, and there's people that have to experience it, because you can't really teach it. I will tell you that you pointed out about the crash in the Potomac.
Yeah.
The co-pilot on that plane was the son of one of our pilots. I happened to be I was in Europe at the time it happened, but culturally, our culture knew exactly what to do. I had nothing to do with this, but everybody knew. Our dispatcher sent one plane to pick up the father, who was on a trip with us at the time. He was in New York. They sent one plane to pick him up. They sent another plane to North Carolina to pick up the family and the fiance, and they brought him to Washington. They initiated our care team. So culturally, they knew exactly what I would want done. They knew Ken would want us to go out there and make sure those families were taken care of, make sure that we did whatever was necessary to do them. And so that was a proud moment for me, because the culture existed beyond me.
Right.
I knew that it got beyond where I needed it to go.
But you talk about communication and how you have people understand, believe in the culture to the point where they can take actions like that. Mm-hmm. And I think, whether you're in a family or in a company or in a community, communication is hard. How do you you've got employees all over the world. How do you help them know who you are, who the company is, and what the right thing to do for FlexJet is going to be?
There's a lot in that question, but I would say, first of all, let's start with the communication. It's an effort. It's relentless. It has to be, and it's telephone. Remember, it's not, we can't walk into this room like if this was all my employees, like we could have clear communication, but that's not how it works. I have 2,000 pilots that go all over the world.
Right.
So when do they come into the office and feel the culture? So it has to happen experientially. But it also, so it's relentless communication. Like every week we put out we have an audio that people can listen to. We put it on our WorkVivo website, right? But you have to, it's very difficult to make sure that you're relentless in that communication. But number two is, it has to be experienced. So you can say that this is who we are culturally. Like I would say that the number one thing our leadership, that I ask of our leaders, is empathy. I think empathy is the number one leadership skill that you need to have. So that's easy, that's an easy communication. But if someone has a problem and we're not sympathetic or empathetic to their problem, then experientially it doesn't match the culture. So three things in business, right? Formulate, follow through, and follow up. Well, we all formulate. We all got an idea every day. There's something we want to do, right? Putting that idea, following through on it's more difficult. What's really hard is following up, is the follow-up. Right. Because it's just monitoring. But if I want to set, if the culture, if the leadership style is empathetic, we have to follow up all the time to make sure the experience reflects that empathy. Mm-hmm. And that's a process of constant monitoring. I always say that if I had a clipboard and stood outside our office, and I was just standing there and nobody knew was on the clipboard, but everybody that showed up in a pink shirt, I put a check mark. People would start wearing pink shirts. They wouldn't know why, but if Ken was monitoring it and making a check mark, they got it. So a good part of management has to be the relentless follow-up.
Yeah.
And to make sure what you're trying to do is happening.
You know, we talked about communication. One of the things that I'm seeing is you've got Instagram, 100,000 followers. To what extent does that help shape and influence who FlexJet is as a company, because it is a reflection of you?
Well, I think with the Instagram, what we're trying to do is we're trying to broaden. We want the industry. We want people to want to work for us. Mm-hmm. We want them to understand it's fun and we have it. It's romantic and it's a fun place to work. So we're trying to cultivate people of the future that would meet would be the culture that we want to have, number one. Number two, it's part of communication to our group. 5,000 people, we've worked for bad people, we've worked for good people. It's much more fun to work for someone you respect and you know. And so the primary audience for Instagram is our employees. It's the employees and the future employees. I want them to see what the personality of the company is, what the things we do are. Who are you working for? Who is this person? And am I proud to work for them, and do I want to work there? And so that's really the idea behind what we try to do in Instagram. But it's people. What you find out is people like private aviation, so they like to follow it. Yeah.
So one of the things
they still argue with me that they absolutely insist to me that there's a G6.
I trust you. You've had an amazing ability to kind of recognize the situation today and see where it's going. You've made some big bets on new aircraft. What is the thought process?
Are you sure you want to make
going?
that statement? I've ordered 3 airplanes on the drawing board, and 2 of them never came to market. So I don't really have a good track record of looking into the future. We bought the Envoy 7, which was made by Fairchild, never came out. We were in the Ariane, so yeah, I don't know about that. But I say this: I'm an inch wide and a mile deep. if you get me outside of the aviation, I don't know. Like, and I always say I'm like the perfectly diversified investor. I have airplanes and cash. I have none because I don't know about anything else. And so I think part of the success is to stay what I was comfortable with, right? So we knew we're training thousands of pilots a year. It wasn't a hard risk to say we should buy a training company when we bought. We have made investments that are around, like doing the re-engineering program when we did the Nextant program, inventing, doing aftermarket parts, the FBO business. So I think the success is that we've never gotten outside of what we know about.
You know, and you talk about investing, and some of us have had the opportunity to go to your spectacular facility here in Cleveland to see the dispatch. Can you talk a little bit about your thought process in designing that so that it would be able to match technologies, culture, and help you? I think you do something like 400 flights a day. So walk through how that fit in.
Well, in the fractional space, it's us and NetJets. Okay, we're the two in the fractional space. And they're owned by Warren Buffett, and I'm not Warren Buffett. So as you can imagine, the sales process is go with the safe serve, go with the financially stable company. I have been going out of, according to NetJets, I've been going out of business for 25 years. I've been on the brink of bankruptcy for that long. So part of it was to make sure it's really a customer-centric, right? You could dispatch today with a bunch of people in different rooms all at a computer terminal. But that doesn't help the culture. So culturally, I wanted to be a place that people were proud to work, that it matched the romance of the industry. That's what an ops center should look like.
Yeah.
That's what it should look like. It shouldn't be a bunch of computer terminals at desks. It needs to look like that, number one. Number two, we could have oriented the board anyway, but we oriented it to the ramp, thinking when customers come in, they'll come in that door and they'll see it. And all of a sudden they might think we're really not going bankrupt, right? They'd get right away that this is a substantial company that's going on here. And number three is we wanted it to be adaptable and able to adapt to the difference. So if those of you who have been there probably don't know that in the center there's a huge desk that we have there that we use for situations because everybody. So we gather at that desk, but that's actually meant to be a hologram. So we don't know what the future of dispatching or operations will be, but we've provided a facility in that room. We can take the board out, bring it centric, and make it a hologram. So so that was some of the things that went into the facility.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me ask you a little bit about the investment that was made by LVMH. And what the thought process, because I heard you say we didn't need the cash. You certainly didn't give up control, but what was the thought process between FlexJet and a company that is world-renowned for luxury?
They approached us in February, and they asked a year ago. And they said to us what they think the luxury of the future is time. And so beyond purses and shoes, we're looking at businesses that give people the luxury of time. We're investing in longevity centers, and we've looked around other industries, and we think the private aviation industry is one that provides time. That's a luxury. And that was their thesis. You could imagine, so let me back up a little bit. In 2018 was when, the long story is that in 2003 I sold FlexJet flight options by accident. I didn't mean to sell it. We had a screwy provision with Raytheon. We were 50-50 owners, and you can have a clause called shareholders roulette, where if I want to buy you out, I make you an offer to buy and to sell. And I went to buy Raytheon out, and I made them an offer to buy them, but I concurrently made an offer to sell to them, and they chose to buy the company. They thought the offer wasn't high enough. So there I was, unemployed again. And when we cut back, I bought the company back in 2009. And 7 years later, the culture had changed, and they got unionized. And when I bought the company back, it took until 2018, and we decertified the union. I got the pilots to put confidence in its leadership team and not in their union, which is, it takes a while. It's the only time it's ever happened. But coming out of that, we thought, how do we compete with NetJets? How are we going to be different? And our thought process was we could create a product that was the Four Seasons against a product that was Marriott. NetJets is a fantastic company. They do a great job. But we thought about them as, we can't be bigger than them. We'll never grow. They're huge. But what we can be is we can be in a different segment. We can grow more into the luxury space. So when Louis Vuitton comes about, we see the immediate. So from 2018 to 2025, we're trying to do things to own the luxury space, our unique interiors, the way our Red Label crews operate. So, but the story didn't resonate until Louis Vuitton aligned with us. So we saw the idea to be there. Now, they originally approached us to buy 80% of the company, but I wasn't ready to do that. I'm not there yet. I got to see here. So we've been involved with them now, and we've been learning about luxury and the amount of things I didn't know about luxury. So and they will be insistent that to have a luxury product, you have to do two things exceptional. Number one, you have to have a luxury, you have to have a product. They would never farm out the manufacture of their product. They would want to control as many things that went into the quality. This is where we end up building our own maintenance infrastructure, and we're building out our own terminal infrastructure also. And that's number one. And then number two, you have to control the quality of distribution. So you have to have a luxury product, and it has to be distributed in a luxury manner. So we've been working with them to go down those two paths, and so far so good. I've learned a little bit of French, but not a lot. Yeah.
Well, let me ask a little bit just in terms of, you talked about we want our brand out there because we want people to come work for us.
Yes. Because that's the essential, right? I mean, if you talk about distribution, it is the people. This company our industry, our service industries are built on people.
So I guess that's what I was going to ask, kind of what is the go, no-go in a interview process where someone may have certain skills, but it just doesn't feel right? I'm
going to give away all the company secrets here today. So one of the things that we do is that we have a psych profile, a predictive index, and every 2 or 3 years we will run that on our best employees. So we'll take our top 10% pilots and we'll find their predictive index profile. And then, so when you apply as a pilot, one of the first, assuming you meet our, because we have 3,000 hour minimums, assuming that you meet that, you'll take the predictive index. And we'll see if culturally you're aligned with what our best workforce does. So building on the people, that's one of the things that we do, is to make sure who's coming in is culturally where we want them to be. So that's step one, and we've expended that through our cabin attendants now, and throughout most of the organization. So building it on the back of the employees is essential. We have 3 fundamental principles that we followed: fanatical attention to detail, we work as a family, and we build the company on our family, and we always take a long-term approach to relationships. So what that means is, if we make them, if you're married, you know how to do this. You always have to admit when you're wrong. And I think that's fundamental for what we ask our people to do. We're not perfect, but you got to apologize, and you have to make up and take responsibility for your errors.
Now, let me ask you about this, because we're talking about the future as well. What are some of the trends you see in the industry today that either encourage you or maybe discourage you about the landscape of business aviation? Whenever you make a good point and a bad point, you always end on the good point, so that they don't remember the bad news. So I'll start with the bad and end on the good. Right now, I've said that private equity's found our industry in a bad way, and so we have a lot of capital trying to find the next thing in our industry, and the result of that has been
innovation's getting stifled in some extents, right? You see in the amount of money, you see what's happening in the maintenance business, where they're rolling up all the mom and pop shops, right? And all of a sudden, I won't tell you the property, but I got approached by someone selling a maintenance business, and I looked at the 5-year projections, and in the 5-year projections, they had maintenance labor costs going at over $300 an hour. So private equity made an investment in this maintenance business with the vision, the investment thesis is to get to $300 an hour in maintenance. Okay, this is the bad side of private equity. Look what's happened with event fees in the FBO business. Every one of us negotiated a contract that probably had, that included lab service and parking and a fuel surcharge and whatever it needed to be, but then they invented a category called event fee. And it wasn't in our contract, so now that's private equity. They came into that industry, they took a duopoly, and they're monetizing it. The manufacturers, they're all building their own maintenance shops. They don't want you leaving. So where do you think the cost of maintenance is gonna go? One of the things that I'm hearing more from my friends that have airplanes and not necessarily FlexJet customers is I used to go in for a 6-month check and it took 5 days. Now it takes 3 weeks. But that's because private equity, big money, has narrowed the funnel in the interest of profitability. It's hard to do a 6-month check in 5. You got to pay people overtime. They got to be there 24 hours, and so they don't want to do that. So I think the bad side is, and then look what's happening with the engine group today. Just what's happening with engine costs. If you look at the hourly rates that they're charging now, so this influx of private equity is raising the cost. In some ways you want to say, well, rich people have an unlimited budget and we can exceed it. So that mentality, I think, is the bad news. The good news is, really, thank you to the airlines, because thank you guys. They don't come to this, do they? The airlines aren't here. No, good. Thank you. I don't want to offend anybody, but thank you, because what happened, in fact, if I thought about 1981 to now, my short answer is I got into business aviation and now I'm in private aviation, because we don't use this only. This tool has almost become a necessity. So what happened was when COVID hit, the airlines in the teens in 2015, 16, 17, they were thinking about luxury. They were creating special services. Some of them had private rooms up front that you could rent. So they were trying. The luxury traveler came into a different door. They could come up the stairs. So they were thinking about how to create a luxury part of commercial travel. Then COVID hit, and then they had to lay everybody off. Remember? And then they couldn't lay them off because they get the money. So then they offered them early retirement. So they took a lot of people out of the system that were from the era of providing customer service. Yeah. Then COVID made them policemen. Put your mask on, get in your seat. I'll tell you when we take off. You can't leave the plane. And so coming out of COVID, they didn't change that. And that experience, I think, commercial airline experience, is so much different now than it was 10 years ago. And COVID chased the frugal wealthy. In our industry, there were always people that would never fly private. I don't want my kids to get spoiled. I don't want my employees to know that we make a lot of money. But then when COVID hit and it was, I can't see my grandkids, they gave up the frugalness. And then once you do that, they didn't go back. And we see that. We did not see any retraction, any significant retraction from the COVID flyers. They stayed private. And then, so thank you to the airlines. We have a whole different class post-COVID. Our average owner is 10 years younger. So we're getting people to buy in at a younger rate. They're using the asset for business, for sure, but also personally. But I would also say business and personal intersect. There's not a line of demarcation anymore. But like, you go to Florida with your family, you do emails, you take phone calls. So you might meet somebody, a customer or something. So these lines of demarcation are cloudy. And so this asset is what LVMH said. It gives you time. It gives you that luxury. Yep. That's the future.
Well,
and no windows.
And I think we are hoping to foster an environment that allows business aviation to thrive in the United States, around the world, today, tomorrow, and well into the future. Yes. Thank you for being on our partner in that. Thank you for being with us.
I hope you